My name is Gracie Shockney, and the book that I chose to read was $40 Million Slaves by William C. Rhoden. It's on my Kindle. Rhoden was a sports journalist and a African American college football athlete, and the book was published in 2006. So, the book covers a lot of the history of what African Americans had to endure in sports. He focuses on slavery and then even into the 19th and 20th century and what that looked like even after slaves were freed. There are a lot of athletes discussed like Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson, Jackie Robinson. Major Taylor, I think, was a cyclist, an African American cyclist, and it just focuses on all the obstacles and the oppression that they faced throughout their athletic careers. He talks about how sports were used in slavery as an outlet for slaves to get their physical and mental aggression and just stress out. And even slave owners would use sports as a way to keep. One of the quotes in the book was that slave owners would use sports to keep African Americans semi civilized because they felt like they would shove them into these sporting events and they could be halfway normal, but then they would be okay with being slaves. And so it was a way to almost force contentment upon slaves, and then how that kind of transitioned into slaves being freed, but that slaves still, or not slaves, African Americans were still kind of in shackles and in a plantation or on a plantation led by white supremacy and white owners and managers, and how they were still kind of tied to that slavery in a way, hence the title $40 Million Slaves, because all of these slaves have, or all these African Americans have a lot of wealth and fame, but they're still tied down in a way to this white supremacy. I read this entire book cover to cover, every word on every page, and for the most part, I really liked this book. It was very informational, very educational. I feel like as a white teacher going into my first classroom, I'm obviously going to have some students who I can't physically relate to, but knowing that background and their culture will help me relate to them, and being able to teach them about their roots and their history will be very beneficial in my future classroom. So I liked that part. One thing that I didn't like about the book, there were so many details and so many different athletes discussed that for me it was kind of hard to keep track of it. I was an athlete in high school. I kind of keep track of sports, but I feel like it would have been beneficial to have more of a foundational knowledge on like the history of sports and African American sports, because he would talk about an athlete in one chapter and then move to the next chapter, and it was hard for me to keep track of what each athlete had done in comparison to each other. So he would bring in one athlete in comparison to another athlete, and for me it was hard to remember what the other athlete had done. So, but overall, it was a good book, and it was very informational and very educational. My lesson plan was built around the concept of knowing the history of African Americans and what they had endured. So my standard focuses, it's a fourth grade standard, and it is on the social and educational changes in Alabama during the 19th and 20th century. So focusing on the social changes, and with it being February, I feel like it's a perfect time with Black History Month, focusing on the social changes with African Americans and desegregation throughout the 19th and 20th century. So I'm using that standard and tying back to Alabama because the standard does identify Alabama as the main focus. So in my lesson plan, I chose different individuals. These are just a few. Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, who founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, Jesse Owens, who was an athlete from Alabama, Rosa Parks, obviously very influential in Alabama, Hank Aaron, who was an Alabamian athlete that was African American, and I'm going to tie that into Jackie Robinson and how Jackie Robinson opened up the world of sports for African Americans. And then W.C. Handy, I hadn't ever really heard of, but he was an African American musician in Alabama. So I chose a bunch of different individuals that were African American who shaped society and education in Alabama that were African American. So still tying into the overall theme of the book that I read about African Americans and what they had endured through sports, but broadening that and talking about education and music and sports and just kind of widening that realm. So the strategies that I use tying into my lesson, I'm going to start with an anticipation guide. The hook of my lesson is kind of cliche, but I've seen it done before and I thought it was really cute. For fourth grade, giving them all M&Ms and talking about how all the M&Ms are different colors, but then you bite into the M&M and they're all the same on the inside. And not that we are all the same on the inside, but that we're all human and that the color on the outside doesn't matter. So from that, moving into an anticipation guide is one of my strategies, asking students, how they thought people have been treated differently throughout history, specifically people of different color or ethnicity or different cultures, and getting their brain churning on that information and thinking about that. And then in the bulk of the lesson, I'm going to use a gallery walk as my second strategy, and placing different pictures and different information and biographies about the individuals that I just listed, and just allowing students to move around the room, interact with that information, probably with a partner, and learning about those individuals instead of just sitting at a desk and reading about all these different people or me lecturing about it. I'm going to do a gallery walk. And then the third strategy that I'm going to use is a wraparound, and it's just a discussion strategy to give each student or each partner group a chance to discuss what they learned, who they thought, was influential or inspirational, why they thought that. And then that will just spark discussion and allow students to talk about the things that African Americans had endured and shaped the social and educational changes in Alabama. So tying back into that standard. Overall, I feel like it flows really well with the theme of the book and how African Americans changed, like the history had changed through sports, but broadening that into education and just society as a whole to tie into my fourth grade standard. I wouldn't use this book in my lesson because there was some language, some racial slurs, just, the reality of the time that was being discussed in the book, but I wouldn't use that. So I'm just going to use the information that I learned through the book to teach students about the history and African American history.